Meeting? All right, I think we're ready to go. Marty, Pam, let us jump, just because of timing. I know that Lauren had to leave for something over in the governor's office, and then Richard apparently is left, and I don't want to lose our quorum. And man, are we echoing now? But let's jump to number 12 on the agenda, which is an action item that I want to get out of the way, and it really ties back to what we were doing on number 5, quite frankly. I should have probably just jumped to 12 then. But it's an update on the FAST Act road charge grant, and I'm going to ask Curtis to kick that off, and between him and Carrie, we'll give you an update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. On item 12 for the FAST Act, the Caltrans submitted a request to the department to get some FAST Act grant funds to go ahead and study and put together kind of a demonstration on the pay at the pump idea. There have been some new developments since a decade ago or so that Oregon went through this and looked at it. We want to use new technologies to see if this is a more feasible idea as an extension of what the TAC has already done. The response from the Department of Finance is the Technical Advisory Committee did not include this as one of their recommended options, and so they denied that. This letter is to the director of the Caltrans saying the Technical Advisory Committee does want to add this as part of the study for the under the recommendations to study road charge, and I'll let Carrie fill in a few of the details.
So you can see the letter is part of your packet of material, and really it is just reflecting what we've been discussing with you since December of last year when the FAST Act first came out, that the department was going to be pursuing funds to enhance our existing pilot, looking at pay at the pump, charging station, looking at organizational design, as well as doing the public outreach and education campaign for road charge, as well as just how transportation is funded in general. Though we have received those funds and entered into a cooperative agreement with FHWA in December of 2016, and we are in the process. We've actually done our procurement and have gone and done our interviews, selected consultants. However, we don't have the authority to expend or get reimbursement authority from the feds. So we are going, as Curtis mentioned, we are asking the legislature and the governor's office to include the ability to expend those funds and receive reimbursement from the feds in the 17-18 fiscal year.
And so staff recommendation on this item is to approve this letter and send it to Malcolm Doherty at Caltrans.
I move approval.
Second.
Sorry, motion from Finnegan, second from Bartlett. Any discussion or questions? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. 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 All right, motion carries. Thank you.
I just want to add one thing, sorry.
Yeah, no
just to let you all know, the notice of funding opportunity for the second round of the FAST Act grant came out last week. It is for $20 million for demonstration purposes only. The department will hopefully be pursuing additional federal funds to advance pay at the pump option in the next federal funding cycle.
All right, so let's do this then between Curtis and you, Carrie, for the May meeting. Why don't you all get your heads together and figure out what we might, as a technical advisory committee, be able to jump on that. Let's make it an action item at our next meeting, and let's roll fast so we can be as competitive as possible on these federal dollars. Because again, I think I've heard enough discussion in item 5, where we're going with this stuff, and it was really ridiculous that, and I understand it, we hadn't talked about it or adopted it. We talked about it, but we didn't make it specific. And you know what? The Department of Finance, they're doing their job. They're protecting monies. And until this advisory committee recommended it, they were going to say, sorry, it's not part of your deal. So that's why it's important that we need to get ahead of the game. And I think it would be a good opportunity on that $20 million because I think California is well poised to compete.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's jump back to where we were. We'll ask Travis to come back up.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a new mic. Can you guys hear me okay? I think I have to
Yes.
lean forward a little bit. If I lean back and you can't hear me, please shout at me leaning forward. I have two brief presentations on policy issues. The first one is on rural drivers, and the second one is on jurisdictional issues. And I hope that these two presentations can just be a little bit of food for thought and maybe some provocative questions to lead you into your next meeting. So I'll start with the impact of road charge on rural drivers. The math of this issue is astoundingly simple to do and astoundingly difficult to explain. It works like this. Urban drivers, on average, drive fewer miles than rural drivers. Not a surprise. On the other hand, rural drivers, on average, are on the left-hand side of this curve on the intersection. They drive less fuel-efficient vehicles. So today, rural drivers are, on average, paying more per mile in fuel tax than urban drivers. So if you were to correct that with a per-mile charge, the net effect would be, on average, rural drivers paying less, urban drivers paying more. Small amounts we're talking about on average, but that is the net effect.
I'm sorry, just a quick question. Where would the average of rural drivers be on this chart? Is it to the left of where those two lines cross, or how much?
It's to the left, well, it's below where they intersect. By how much depends on the state, and we don't have numbers yet for California. I know that they'll come someday. They're working on it. But we have consistent results from every other state that's looked at this, that rural drivers are on the left-hand side of that intersection and urban drivers on the right-hand side. And so the examples that we can share are Washington has done this study back in 2014 that found that. Oregon did a study in 2013 that found the same thing. In fact, in Oregon, they found that the difference in miles driven between urban and rural, at least in their state, was not actually significant. And the reason in Oregon is because so many of the rural residents actually live in the western part of the state on the coast, in areas that are considered rural, but they're coastal, and so the distances driven are much smaller. Whereas in California, okay, excuse me.
They're having technical issues.
It's not being webcasted, his.
Presentation.
We didn't want to hear it. No, I'm just kidding. I'll wait till we get reorganized and get a thumbs up from the crew. Give us a test.
Okay, can you hear me now?
All right, you're back on the air.
All right. Sorry for that. So basically similar results in Oregon. On average, rural drivers would pay a little bit less under a road charge. So the California results will be soon. I can't say when, I don't know. There are other issues though, and this is just one little slide. It's not just about the financial impact. There are other issues to consider for rural drivers that relate to road charge policy. One of them is off-road miles. Rural drivers tend to, on average, drive more miles off-road. We had a number of rural participants who made inquiries about this topic during the pilot. And of course, automating the exemption of those miles under a road charge requires participants to have some sort of location-enabled reporting method. So that may lead to privacy concerns about the fairness for rural drivers of getting those off-road exemptions if they're required to opt into a location-based method. And there is, of course, a manual option for claiming off-road refunds. We tested that in the pilot as well, but based on that experience, we only had 13 people claim refunds, but it was not easy to administer, even for just 13. Imagine scaling that up. Perhaps not the best way to do refunds for off-road miles. And then another point about that is that getting reliable map data are very important. That's a critical piece of automating the off-road exemption, and Matthew Dorfman will talk a lot more about that next month. The issue of distribution of funding is, of course, very important for rural residents and rural districts. So a change to a road charge oftentimes comes sort of along with the notion of return to source or self-sufficiency, and that policy issue, which has been raised in front of this committee a number of times, that needs to be weighed very carefully as part of the rural question. And then lastly, the issue of transportation alternatives. Rural drivers have fewer alternatives. They rely on their vehicles. Long-distance commuters, likewise, especially in Southern California, don't have transit alternatives or biking or walking. And so although on average, again, rural drivers will pay less, the individual impacts are going to be more variable and the individual situations are going to be more sensitive. So that's just sort of teeing up the rural question and the sort of add-on questions that go along with the issue of rural drivers and road charge. Any questions?
Hearing none.
Okay.
All right, now we go to the jurisdictional issues.
Okay. This is my last presentation, and I'll tie it back to comments Supervisor Bartlett that you made at the beginning of the meeting about...
And just, if I could, just for purposes of the agenda, this is item 11B.
Okay. Supervisor Bartlett, you mentioned that a lot of the issues that are coming up now on this topic will be political issues, legislative questions. So this presentation is literally just 10 questions. We don't have answers. We can't answer them. They are policy questions that others have to answer, but through our work in the pilot and looking at the public feedback and some of the stakeholder feedback, we wanted to distill some of these questions for your consideration. And we divided them into 2 types of local jurisdictions, local agencies and toll authorities, and then 3 categories of questions for each. Questions regarding rate setting, expenditures, and operations. So for local agencies, there are rate-related questions for road charging. And probably the first one that local agencies will ask is, will the road charge generate the same amount of revenue that I'm currently getting under current funding mechanism? The second one, which is a little bit esoteric, but it's actually quite important. Will sales tax apply to road charge? There's a small component of sales tax on fuel that is actually applied to the excise tax on fuel. So the calculation of the sales tax includes the excise tax as part of that calculation. So if you take away the fuel tax and switch to a road charge, should there be that small component of sales tax on the road charge? That funding is a general revenue source, so that's an open question. And then finally, a lot of conversation about local authorities and the ability to do some sort of local option on top of the statewide road charge. Related to expenditures, will the state have any rules? Will state policy involve rules about how locals can spend the money that's generated from road charges? And then lastly, on operations, getting back to the data discussion earlier, the data that are collected at a road charge program, not just for research purposes, but also for planning purposes for local agencies, how much of that information will be made available and under what terms? The second category of agencies is toll authorities. And we've had a number of comments and inputs from partners in the toll industry throughout this program. It's been very helpful. So the first set of questions is about rates. Again, we've heard this one, should miles driven on toll roads be exempt from road charge? Currently, of course, you don't get a refund of gas tax for the miles that you drive on toll roads, but being a much more visible form of paying for road use, people will start asking this question.
So with regard to, not all toll roads and toll lanes, express lanes, et cetera, are created equal. And I think we really have to keep in mind that it's on a case-by-case basis with regard to potential exemptions. So for instance, the Transportation Corridor Agency has a number of toll roads that are privately financed and built out, but they are maintained by Caltrans. And so I would not think there would be any exemption there because those roads, we need to get the VMT for the toll roads to go to Caltrans for the maintenance aspect. Now you've got other roads like the 91 Express that's already in effect where OCTA pays 100% of the maintenance for those roads. And you've got the upcoming project, the I-405 project, which is the $1.4 billion project that will have 2 toll lanes or express lanes and then a new general purpose lane. But on the toll lane aspect of it, a percentage of the toll fee that the rider pays will go towards maintenance of the toll lanes. So you wouldn't want to have a VMT on top of the charge for the toll lane fee that is charged, since a portion of that toll fee goes towards maintenance. And so it gets to be complicated in that you need to have a transponder to ride in these lanes. What I would anticipate is, it'll be very easy with the new 6T technology that's coming forth, where you have the little sticker in your windows. So I would envision that on a toll lane like the I-405 project, as you enter, your the VMT counter would switch off, your toll lane portion would switch on, and then as you exit, it would be the reverse. You would then start picking up VMT, and your toll lane portion of it would switch off. So it's got to be case by case, and I know it's going to be complicated with all the different variations in the state of California, but for sake of fairness, we have to look at everything on a case-by-case basis.
And I would add for May's meeting, when we talk particularly about a pilot where it's a pay-at-the-pump model, a lot of these issues, whether we're talking about how do you account for off-road miles or how do you account for toll roads, there are some challenges that a pay-at-the-pump model creates, and even if we don't answer the question, should toll roads be exempt, the question would be, how can they be exempt under such a, under such a technology? Because
Well, and under the current system, you are paying for toll roads and you are paying off-road.
that's right, you're paying both.
You're paying both.
Yeah.
And we'd probably end up having to see a financial model as to what happens if all of a sudden we're not getting that revenue when people are on the 91 every day. And because right now they're paying for both the miles, technically via gas tax, and the toll. And those become some fiscal considerations that the bean counters are going to be very worried about. Right, Norma?
And one thing that you could essentially do is, as we move forward with the VMT model, look at what you've got on the toll lanes like the 91 Express and the I-405 project, and maybe back out the maintenance aspect of the toll fee so that it makes it really simple, so that in the future, no matter where you are, if you're on a toll lane, toll road, anywhere in California, you pay the VMT. So there are ways to make it then consistent as long as we think in advance.
Great comments, thanks. That kind of plays right into the second bullet, which is regardless of which way you go, and how do you then communicate that to the public so that they understand it and it's clear what they're paying and when and how much? On the expenditure side, okay, now we're collecting revenue potentially for some of that road use on tolled facilities. How should that proportion of the revenue be spent? So that plays right into the conversation that we just had. And then on the operational side, the opportunities potentially for paying road charge using existing toll service providers, and on the converse, if there are road charge account managers, can they be used to collect tolls? So those are two opportunities to explore as well.
Lisa?
And the answer to that is no. When we are financing toll roads, toll lanes in California, we have very strict bond covenants with our bondholders. And I can guarantee you they're never going to let the account managers start collecting tolls and then apportion money out here and there. So just keep that in mind. I think the answer to that one is probably a resounding no.
I think you're absolutely right, Member Bartlett. But the converse of that, as we get into next month's meeting, may be true. The toll operators may be able to collect mileage.
That's a good point. I think if we think about how we want to set up the program statewide, we can probably modify the collection methodology, and the data collection, and then apportion so much for VMT, so much for the toll fee. So I think you're right. The reverse of just exactly what you said is true. So that's something that's, I think, open for discussion.
Well, and the whole point is that infrastructure already exists.
Yes.
Why reinvent the wheel? And I think those are the kind of brainstorming things we want to talk about at our meeting in San Diego.
Yeah, we already have the ability so that if you have one transponder, you can travel anywhere in the state of California on a toll lane or toll road. And if you've got the transponder and you get billed by the TCA, for instance, but you're on the 110 Express, they keep track of where you're traveling and apportion the appropriate dollars to the different agencies. So we already have that ability, so I don't know why we couldn't add VNT onto that.
I have an idea. We're going to talk about that next month.
Okay, Mr. Chair, that concludes my presentations for today. Thank you very much.
I have one more question, please. Yeah. Oh, I think one of the really useful or promising aspects of your model is that, a huge part of communicating about road charge is going to be that issue of equity. And so to the extent that your model can be used to illustrate the equity issues, just as you've done with rural versus urban users, to think about low income versus moderate or higher income, different types of vehicles, I think your model, I look forward to seeing ways in which your model can be used to convey that story.
Well, and I understand, Travis, this is your last appearance in front of the task force?
This is my final appearance. Would
Well,
you?
we want to just thank you for all your efforts and everything. You've been a stalwart, stellar person in this effort all along, and you've traveled all over the state of California with us, and we very much appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could say a couple of words of thanks as well.
Please.
I have just this month taken on a new leadership role in my company as managing partner, and I consider this program probably one of the most important teaching opportunities that I've had for leadership, and I've learned a lot from this committee. The questions that you've asked, the recommendations you made, and to borrow Mr. Kay's words, the admonitions you have given us, they've challenged me and my colleagues, they've motivated all of us, and we've learned a lot from all of you. You have pushed the envelope on this topic farther than anyone has ever pushed it. You took what Oregon did and you moved the ball a lot further forward than we ever imagined. So I was tremendously honored to be a part of it. All of my colleagues were as well, to work with you all, to work with Norma and Brady and Carrie and your team. We have a little bit of work left to do to get the final report, and the discussions that you started today on policy, next steps. Very fascinating stuff. We wish you the best, and we will be watching closely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. All right, let's give you a round of applause to all their work. All right, well, with that, let's move to item 13 on the agenda, which is a review of the action items, and we'll have Curtis walk us through the parking lot and other pending matters, which I don't think is too big, but go ahead, Chris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have written down a number of things that the members have either request for or we want to talk about. Starting off with describing how the margins of error were arrived at from Ms. Calra. Providing some of the pilot data to researchers. I think we're going to pull together a number of people, including Ms. Calra, Ms. Benzel, and through the commission to talk about how that might be structured and working with Caltrans on that. We want to make sure that the data on the revenue forecast is updated and as complete as possible, and I know D'Artagnan is already working on that, so we'll get those set together and described particularly for Professor Rock. We want to make sure that the equity issues that exist in transportation currently are brought into the next conversation in May so that we can determine, how far the ball is moving on that, or if it's moving at all, and, whether there's going to be arguments to move it even beyond what road charge might be able to do. We want to break out the revenues by the different segments of the project and talk about a new revenue neutral per mile charge. I know that Travis had mentioned they updated the model to 2.4 cents, but I do want to make sure we look into that and make sure that that's the correct number to look at versus the 1.8 that was used in the pilot. And then also breaking down the focus groups by different segments and making sure that we're getting cross sections of, minority, rural residents who are women, and putting those pieces all together and trying to get a better, more granular picture of where those pieces lie and which ones are statistically significant, which ones may not have been hit very well. We do want to also address the chair's question about whether we can retain the names and contact information for the people who actually participated. And lastly, make sure that we work with Caltrans and work on any actions that the TAC may need to take for the next meeting to ensure that we get some additional FAST Act grant funds.
And with that, any other issues that staff has missed? Hearing none, let's go to the last item, or second to last item on the agenda, and see if any members of the public would like to address the Technical Advisory Committee. You don't look like you fell asleep. It's just apparently we've just covered all the issues. Okay. Well, good enough. I've been watching. Nobody fell asleep during the meeting. So. No, and seriously, I just want to say how much I've appreciated the work of this advisory committee up to this point, and we will continue to push forward. And today was another great example of the expertise and the information that this committee, as Travis referenced, brings to the table. So I just want to offer that as an observation. And I again thank Norma and Carrie and Brady for the stalwart work at Caltrans, and of course Curtis and Christina and Susan at the Transportation Commission. So thank you again. We'll look forward to seeing you in San Diego at our next meeting, which will be May 19th. It's a Friday, and we'll be getting information out. And with that, we